Here we have the trigonometry nodes: sine, cosine and tangent, and the inverse of those functions. Odd ones of these have cropped up a number of times throughout the whole of the RHN series, so I'm not going to go over the whole description of what they are and mean again. Instead, I'm going to show you another example way of using them without thinking about the numbers and just thinking about the shapes that these guys describe. So here in Displacement Editor for this plane, I'm going to use the trig functions to create a wave displacement on here. Grab the spot info for my plane first. I'm also going to grab one of the good old split vectors, because of course these trig nodes take an input number as a scalar to apply their function to, so I need to get something. In this case I'm going to use the axis of the object itself. So, world spot to the vector, I'm going to take the x-axis into sine, and that gives me the sine of the x position of each spot on this surface. Grab a good old make vector, and let's displace this up on the y. Sine into y, vector into input, and there we go. We now have a sine wave running through our object. The x-axis is being signed to define the y displacement. The x position of each spot, each point, is having the sine function applied, and that's becoming the y-axis that the point is displaced toward. Cosine is the exact same thing, except slightly phase shifted. Tan is an interesting one. When you plot a tan curve, as you'll see if you look up or read up on any of these things, once you go off the 1, once the function pushes a value off the 1, then the next value reappears at the negative 1. So we get this really kooky looking displacement like this, where the object is thrown right the way up and then dragged back down again before coming up. Then of course you have the inverse functions, which of course normally take an input number in the 1, -1 range, as you would get out of the regular functions, and convert it into a bigger number. Of course sine 1 is the same as 90 degrees of angle, so if I pump 1 into arcsine I get 90 out. So what we should be able to deduce straight away is that as the x value is increasing in either side, this is going to output an ever increasing number for y, and that's exactly what we get, this exponential curve that doesn't come back down again, it just keeps going up. Arc cos of course again the same, but phase shifted, and arc tan now providing this same curve that we see occurring in tan here, this same sort of gradation, but clamped of a fashion. Now what we can also do with these guys when we're using them in this way is, because of course they are functions and produce curves and waves, is that they have the normal internal properties of such things, such as frequency and amplitude, and we can easily create controls for those. So if I take a multiply to multiply up my x value, then as I increase that value, I basically increase the frequency of my sine function. Might need a few more subdivisions on that plane to smooth it out there, I think. There we go. And of course I can do the same thing on the opposite side of my sine function in order to get control over the amplitude. I could also, if I wanted, take an add to add a value onto my x, which then gives me a phase shift control for the function. Using the trig nodes in this way for displacement effects is quite useful, because in nature an awful lot of things do come in sine waves. Ocean waves, ripples on water, pendulums swinging, so on and so forth. If you measure and map the back and forth wave patterns of these things, you find the same thing again and again, sinusoidal action. So setting these things up, and of course animating them in some way, and their values, phase, amplitude and the like, can be a great way to get naturalistic effects into your animation work, and give you some procedural animation, allowing you to do quickly and simply with a few nodes what would otherwise take a long time to keyframe by hand. And of course don't forget that you can dirty these things up a bit via procedurals or other methods and so on. So I hope that's given you another way to think about how you might use trigonometry nodes in your networks for achieving different effects, and also hopefully given you another example of this mantra I keep pushing about trying to work with the shapes and effects that the functions describe rather than the functions themselves.